Our study this morning is in the 9th chapter of Jeremiah, verse 17. Jeremiah 9, verse 17. Jason, would you word a prayer for us this morning?
Heavenly Father, we're thankful for all those gathered this morning. We're thankful for the visitors that we have with us. We're thankful for the members that made studying your word a priority. Heavenly Father, we're thankful for the people who are putting in the time to study your word in depth and share it with us. We pray this morning that as all the classes open your word and look at it and take it into our hearts and our minds, that they'll do an evaluation of their lives and how they compare to what's found in your word. If there are changes that need to be made, they'll be willing to make those changes. Heavenly Father, help us to listen attentively and continue to grow closer to you. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. In the first part of the 9th chapter of Jeremiah, Jeremiah seems to be weeping over the culture over the situation with the Jews. He continues his message about their social corruption, their bad behavior. Then he sheds more tears with regard to the landscape of the religious, moral landscape of the Jews. And he continues to prophesy with regard to how the land is going to lay in desolation. And of course, all this is prophesying the Babylonian assault, the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem, and just a terrible situation. As I was rereading for I don't know how many times, the book of Genesis the last couple days or so, and looking at the history of the origin of the Jewish community, it occurred to me as I reflect on Jeremiah that when Jacob came on the scene, he wasn't a very good character, and his boys weren't very good characters, right? Think of just the bad behavior of the children of Jacob. Murder, right? And even contemplating the murder of their brother, Joseph. One son going into his father's concubine. I mean, that was a motley crew. And you kind of, I don't know, you couldn't blame the Jews of Jeremiah's time about that, but it was just kind of an interesting. I just reflected on that, and just really interesting that the origin of the Jewish nation wasn't all that great in terms of behavior. But Jeremiah continues his sermons, his prophecies, and we'll begin with the 17th verse of the 9th chapter of Jeremiah this morning. Yeah. Yeah, it was a bad scene. Yeah. That group was just prone to, but that isn't, and you consider that they were better than the rest of the folks, right? The rest of the nations. So our world is, our world is broken, and our country, in many respects, is broken. But compared to some other nations, we're not too bad. And compared to what has gone before us in terms of civilizations, we're not all that bad. Now, there's no consolation in being not all that bad. It's the only consolation is being a righteous nation, because we understand that God blesses righteousness, a nation that's righteous. Yeah, Sam, they don't know what they're doing, but they sure had supreme guidance and supreme blessings. Yeah, you're right about that, but it's just interesting. Now, beginning in verse 17, Jeremiah gives this symbolism of a funeral. And he says in verse 17, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts." That God is referred to as the Lord of hosts oftentimes in Scripture. He says, "Consider ye." Now, the funeral is already announced. Now, what's that mean? If the funeral is already announced, there's seemingly no turning back. I mean, it's over. "Thus saith the Lord, consider ye, and call the mourning women, that they may come, and send for cunning women, that they may come." It's my understanding in that particular culture, and even in the New Testament culture, they often hired people to, mourn at a funeral procession or whatever. It was kind of a tradition. And so Jeremiah said, call for the mourning women, those that are going to mourn over this funeral, that they may come, and send for cunning women, that they may come. And let them make haste and take up a wailing for us. The mourning, wailing, crying, whatever. That our eyes may run down with tears, and our eyelids gush out with waters. He's saying, you're done. This social order is done. "For the voice of wailing is heard out of Zion. How are we spoiled? We are greatly confounded, because we have forsaken the land, because our dwellings have cast us out." He kind of that question of, how are we spoiled? What's behind all of this? Well, he answers it quickly and says it's because of our bad behavior. "For the voice of wailing is heard out of Zion. How are we spoiled? We are greatly confounded, because we have forsaken the land, because our dwellings have cast us out." I've said this. We've said this repeatedly. Where the average citizen in the United States, and as you think of foreign affairs, and you think of our role in the Middle East as a country, and our unwavering support of Israel, so many people in our country have the idea that the Jews, that land belongs to the Jews. It still belongs to the Jews. Well, they were cast out. A remnant was returned, but then eventually Rome destroyed Jerusalem and the temple, and that territory was no longer belonging to them. Verse let's look at verse 20 again. And yet hear the word of the Lord, O ye women, and let your ear receive the word of his mouth, and teach your daughters wailing, and every one her neighbor lamentation. Now, this assault, this destruction, the misery surrounding all of this is going to be so great that there aren't enough mourners available, for this funeral idea. Aren't enough mourners. So you better be teaching your daughters to mourn. This is symbolic of how great the destruction is going to be. For death is come into our windows. For death has come into our windows. Think of that expression. For death has come into our windows. So it's the symbolism here. Look out the window, and what do you see? Death. Death staring at you. It's if you're looking out your window at night and you see a face on the outside looking in that's not familiar, that's a problem. But as the symbolism, you look out and there's the symbol of death. See the symbolism there. It's not good. Not a pleasant thought. For death is coming to our windows. Yeah, it's come right in. Look out, here it comes, death. And is entered into our palaces. Now, wouldn't that shake up an audience? Wouldn't that shake up the Jews? For the preacher to say, look out the window and death's staring you in the face. Wouldn't that cause some penitence? Don't you think?
Well, nothing else has so far.
Well, they were really hardened, weren't they? They had no conscience. They just seemed to be beyond godly repair.
That's why they're at this point right now.
Yeah. For death has come up into our windows and is entered into our palaces. When it says palaces, what's that mean? What's the idea there? The big boys and the big girls of the social order are not going to escape this. Everybody, the leadership, everybody, and it's come to our palaces. To cut off the children from without and the young men from the street. The young men not going to be saved. Nobody's going to escape this assault by this foreign power, the Babylonian. Speak, thus saith the Lord, even the carcasses of men, the dead bodies, shall fall as dung in the open field. Now that's a disheartening kind of expression. Carcasses will be as dung upon the open field. And as a handful after the harvestman, none shall gather them, and except the birds, the turkey vultures circling around. You can visualize that kind of a situation. In verse 23, he says, thus saith the Lord, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom, neither let the mighty man glory in his might, let not the rich man glory in his riches. Now, Apostle Paul talked about this in the 1st and 2nd Corinthians letter, about the role of wealth and might and so on. As we look at this, there are those who are proud, and maybe rightly so, of their wisdom, in academia and the universities across America, people are proud of their wisdom and nobody can tell them anything. There are those who are extremely wealthy. Several families in America have hundreds of billions of dollars. Do they need anything? There are those in our country who are powerful politically, in the business community, in the union community. They're powerful. Like Jimmy Hoffa. Now most of you won't even know that name. You don't remember that name, do you? You remember the name. Union leader consorting with the mafia. And his attitude was, nobody can touch me because I'm powerful. I've got union power. Well, we don't know what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. Well, there's a lot of theories about that. The bottom line is, at the end of the day, power, might, military might, wisdom, wealth, doesn't cut it. That's what Jeremiah is saying here. He says, thus saith the Lord, let not the wise glory in his wisdom, neither let the mighty man glory in his might, whether that be military or whatever expression of might. Let not the rich man glory in his riches, but let him that glorieth glory in this, and he that understandeth knoweth me, that I am the Lord, which exercise loving kindness, judgment, righteousness in the earth. Well, so where is the glorying to be done? Well, obviously it relates to glorifying God. And notice that notice how he portrays God, or how God is portrayed here, exercising loving kindness, and then judgment. Now, what's judgment? Has to do with accountability, doesn't it? So, God has a system of judgment, a system of justice and righteousness in the earth. For in these things I delight, saith the Lord. So, that kind of summarizes the situation there. Jeremiah reminding them, don't trust in anything but God and his righteousness, his judgment. Behold, verse 25, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will punish all them which are circumcised with the uncircumcised. Now, who were the circumcised? Obviously the Jews. So, here's punishment to the Jews, punishment to the uncircumcised, or typically the other nations. Circumcision wasn't totally unique to the Jews. There were other societies that practiced that circumcision, but the Jews were particularly known for that. God set them apart with that right. I will punish all them that are circumcised with the uncircumcised. Then he identifies, a model. He identifies some examples here of nations: Egypt and Judah. The uncircumcised with the circumcised, and Edom, and the children of Ammon and Moab, and all that are in the uttermost parts, uttermost corners, that dwell in the wilderness. For all these nations are uncircumcised, basically, they're uncircumcised. And all of the house of Israel that are uncircumcised in the heart. Was it enough to be circumcised physically? Some of the Jews thought so, right? Was that enough? Well, obviously not. They could be circumcised physically, but uncircumcised in the heart. Circumcision having to do with a covenant with God. If that covenant with God isn't in the heart, then circumcision meant nothing. Being born into the Jewish community meant nothing if they didn't have the right heart. Right? So that's what he's saying here. Baptism in the New Testament era is essential, but if one has an uncircumcised heart and one isn't, righteous, is the baptism going to do him any good? No more so than the Jews that were circumcised physically, you see. Well, he's kind of this preacher here is pouring it on the audience, so to speak. God says he's going to punish folks, and so they should have been penitent, but they weren't. So chapter 10 then is just a mere continuation of the thoughts that the preacher Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah had. It's kind of interesting, some interesting stuff here. Hear ye the word which the Lord speaketh unto you, O house of Israel. Now, Jeremiah kind of replete, and hear the word of the Lord. Hear, it's a repeated refrain here. Hear ye the word which the Lord speaketh unto you, O house of Israel. For thus saith the Lord, learn not the ways of the heathen. Israel was to be a light to the world. Israel was to show the way to the world and show how there's a connection between, in that physical realm, a connection between prosperity and righteousness. A connection between the good life and the law of Moses. But Israel failed to be that light that they were supposed to be. Thus saith the Lord, learn not the way of the heathen. Now, when the Jews went into the promised land, the land that flowed with milk and honey, they were to stamp out the civilizations that were corrupt. But in the scheme of things, what did they do?
Kept stuff for themselves.
Pardon me?
They kept stuff for themselves, like animals and treasure instead of.
Yeah. Well, they often copied the heathen ways rather than the heathen learning from the Jews, oftentimes. The world can creep into the church, right? And it does. And that's the issue there. So thus saith the Lord, learn not the way of the heathen, and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the heathen are dismayed at them. What's that, signs of heaven? What's that all about? The signs of heaven. Many of those people worship the sun, the stars, the heavenly bodies, they worship the created rather than the creator. But this specifically, what do you suppose it means here, the signs of heaven? Astrology. Anybody ever know any? What do we know about astrology? Born under a certain sign? What's that about? That probably isn't such a good thing to follow that kind of stuff, right? So, you see, that sort of heathen thing isn't particularly dead. It's still alive. For the customs of the people are vain. For one cutteth a tree out of the forest, and the work of the hands of the workmen with the axe. They deck it with silver and with gold, and they fasten it with nails, with hammers, that it move not. Now, Isaiah discussed this whole thing, or in the book of Isaiah, this whole thing is discussed as to how stupid it is. And stupid is a good word here for this. How stupid it is for, you had to go out and cut down a tree, carve it up, put some jewels on it, fasten it up so it doesn't fall over, and then say, this is my God. Now, isn't that stupid?
It's stupid on a lot of levels. Number one, you create something and then you're the creator and you worship the created.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not to mention, it's just a stupid piece of wood that you just made.
Yeah. Worship something that you've created rather than worshiping the Creator.
You know, like Ned said before, they knew what God could do. That's what blows my mind. They knew what he could do, and they still were just defiant. It's not even the word.
Yeah. For they deck it with silver and with gold, fasten it with nails and hammers, that it move not. You gotta nail this thing down, or it'll fall over. What?
I'm kind of thinking this is connected to this, what became known as the celebration of Saturnalia. Was the celebration of Saturn. There was a certain week that the old timers would have time off where anything goes, no law. You could rob, you could just commit adultery, just free everything. Party all the time, giving of gifts. And I think this is connected to that.
Well, what societies practice that
Well, it
sort of?
became really prevalent in the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
I think this is where the early beginnings of it was at. And Saturnalia, that was on the 25th of December. And we got connected to our Christmas.
Yeah.
I think it's all incorporated together
Yeah.
as time and history goes by.
Yeah, and that. Yeah, I mean, people have used a lot of imagination to conjure up things to worship.
But it's like you say, it's connected to this sun worship, moon worship, Saturn.
Yeah.
Saturn.
Yeah.
You have different gods for all this.
Yeah. And the Romans had different gods for those bodies. Yeah. It's amazing how man has been ingenious at figuring out something to worship rather than God. I mean, it's just amazing that mankind would reject the Creator in terms of something that had been created, or something that they created themselves in the form of an idol, a stalk of wood, whatever. It's just amazing how ingenious people have, over the centuries, and still do. It's like the what is that Buddha? Is that the prevalent in India's? There was a sign in China. I think it was in China or India. Sign on a particular edifice. It said that the Buddha exhibit is shut down for cleaning the reshaping the Buddha or whatever. Now, can you imagine shut down so that they could spruce up their God? Wow. Therefore, are they, verse 5 continued, they are upright as the palm tree. He's talking about these created, these idols they created. They are upright as the palm tree, but speak not. Well, these things obviously can't speak. They must needs be born. You've got to carry them around because they cannot go. Be not afraid of them, for they cannot do evil. Neither also is it in them to do any good. Can't do good. They're just inert objects, just a creation of man. For as much as there is none like unto thee. Now, the contrast here. Contrast between the idol. Jeremiah says, for as much as there is none like unto thee, O Lord, thou art great, and thy name is great in might. It reminds us of the song, How Great Thou Art. O Lord, thou art great, and thy name is great in might. What or who would not fear thee, O King of nations? His question is, you don't fear these idols. And I guess the rhetorical question is, who would not fear thee, O King of nations? I suppose people have a certain amount of fear for the leadership of their country, right? They're national heroes, kind of a awe, kind of a maybe even an unhealthy respect for them. But he says here, who would not fear thee, O King of nations? God being the King of the nations, God being the determination of the destiny of nations. Is that right? I mean, he determined the destiny of Assyria in the book of Daniel. The Babylonians. He determined the destiny of the Grecian Empire, the destiny of the Roman Empire. Is God still determining the destiny of civilizations? Would seem so. King of nations, for to thee doth it appertain, for as much as among all the wise men of the nations, and in all their kingdoms, there is none like unto thee. The Caesars demanded worship, right? At one point in history, Nebuchadnezzar demanded worship there in that Babylonian civilization. From time to time, leaders of nations have demanded worship. Well, he says, there's none like unto thee. But they are altogether brutish. What's that mean? They're like animals. They are altogether brutish. They're dumb as an ox. They're foolish. They're stupid. The stock is a doctrine of vanities. The stock, the idol. Doctrine of vanities. Of what's vanity? Emptiness. Vain. Useless. Of no value. Silver spreadeth into plates is brought from Tarsus. They apparently imported various batches of silver and gold and so forth to dress up these idols. And gold from Euphrates, and the work of the workman, and the hands of the founder, that is the goldsmith. Blue and purple is their clothing, and they are all the work of cunning men. So, describing the idols, dressing up a stalk of wood, dressing with gold and silver and with ornaments and clothing. But the Lord is the true God. See, it goes back and forth here, comparing the idols to the Creator, to the God, to the Lord. But the Lord is true, is the true God. He's the living God, everlasting King. At his wrath the earth shall tremble, and the nations shall not be able to abide in his indignation. Now, doesn't that get your attention? Doesn't that get our attention? Shouldn't have gotten the attention of those people. Thus saith ye unto them, the gods that have not made the heavens and the earth, even they shall perish from the earth and from under the heavens. How marvelous is the universe. Is that right? How marvelous is the precision of the earth. The sun comes in our bedroom window at one time of the year and shines on one wall. At another time of the year it comes in, the sun rays come in and shines on the other side of the wall, which, here this earth spinning around, and then it's tilting on its axis. And it's so predictable that we can predict 10 years from now when the sun's going to rise, right? How marvelous the universe is. And yet there are those who have the idea that there was some sort of a cosmic happening that set all this in motion, set all this up. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You've got salt water and not regular meat, and there's just a line right
Yeah. We had sermons on evidences that reminded us of how precious this and how great the evidence is, the compilation of evidence that God created this. He hath made the earth by his power. Sounds like the Genesis story here, doesn't it? There. Let's go back to verse 11. Thus shall ye say unto them, the gods that have not made the heavens and the earth, even they shall perish from the earth and from under these heavens. All of this material thing, including the gods that have been created, going to perish. He hath made the earth by his power. He spoke, this into existence. He hath established the world by his wisdom. Now think of how that compares to the wisdom of mankind. And he has stretched out the heavens by his discretion. When he uttereth his voice, there is a multitude of waters in the heavens. He has caused the vapors to ascend from the ends of the earth. He hath made lightnings with rain, and bringeth forth the wind out of his treasures. As Nicky mentioned, the ecosystem, how the waters rain on the land and then return to the sea, and then the cycle. What an amazing matter this is. Now he compared, the creation, the Creator, compared to man. Every man is brutish, animal-like. It's just so inferior. Every man is brutish in his knowledge. Every founder is confounded by the graven image. For his molten image is a falsehood, and there's no breath in them. They are vanity and the work of errors. In the time of their visitation they shall perish. The portion of Jacob is not like them. Now, God nurtured this imperfect man, Jacob, and these imperfect, greatly imperfect sons of Jacob. And so there was a covenant. Abraham, God's covenant. Jacob, God's covenant. Isaac's covenant with God. Jacob's covenant with God. God had a portion. He was a part of this Jewish society. And he reminds them of that. The portion of Jacob is not like them. It wasn't based on any idolatry or any fiction or any astrology or any of that stuff. The portion of Jacob is not like them, for he is the former of all things, that is, the creator of all things. And Israel is the rod of his inheritance, that is, the tribe of his inheritance. The Lord of hosts is his name. The Lord of hosts is his name. I think we will stop right there at verse 17 of chapter 10. Verse 17 of chapter 10.